The storm began as a distant whisper, a promise of something greater. Lara was alone in her house, high on the hill, far enough from the city to be unreachable by those who still believed the world was safe. But that night, the wind brought something more than rain and thunder. Something that shouldn't be there. She lay there, eyes heavy with sleep, when the sound woke her. A low noise, as if something were crawling across the roof. Lara sat up, feeling the early morning chill seeping through. The wooden walls of the house. The storm was raging, but the sound on the roof was different, steady, persistent, as if a creature were crawling, slowly and deliberately, toward her door. She ran to the window trying to see in the darkness, but the trees danced violently in the wind, creating distorted shadows that made everything even more confusing. Lara thought about calling the police, but the phone line was down. She could feel the electricity in the house failing, which made her feel even more vulnerable. The sound stopped for a moment. Lara took a deep breath, trying to convince herself that she was just imagining things. But then a knock, heavy and dull, made the windows rattle. It was at the back of the house, at the kitchen door. Lara froze. Her heart raced, and the light on the lamp flickered briefly before going out completely. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaking. But no one answered. Silence fell, but something was wrong. Lara knew she shouldn't open the door. She was about to turn around and look for a flashlight when she heard the voice. It wasn't human. It was deep and guttural, reverberating inside her mind, as if it came from some distant, immeasurable place. "Prepare yourself. The abyss will open." The air turned chilly. Lara felt the hairs on her neck stand on end, her breathing becoming labored. She glanced at the door, the instinct to flee seizing her body. But before she could move, another sound came, the sound of something slowly. Shuffling up the stairs. Lara ran to the nearest closet and locked herself in, her hands shaking as she gripped the doorknob. She was completely alone. Or so she thought. When she peeked through the crack in the door, she saw a shadow move in the darkness, and the same voice whispered once more, closer than ever. "You can't escape." Lara couldn't sleep that night. The shadow, the voice, the feeling of being watched, it was all etched into her mind. The storm outside seemed to have stopped, but the chaos inside her house continued, taking over every thought, every breath. She had locked all the doors, closed the curtains, but the fear wouldn't leave her. She knew something was coming, something she couldn't ignore. The next morning, the sun seemed shy, fighting against the heavy clouds that still hung over the city. Lara woke up early, her face marked with fatigue, but without the courage to get out of bed. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was alert, restless. She knew she could not continue to ignore what was happening, and her grandfather's diary was the only clue she had. Her grandfather, Samuel, had been a man of faith, but also of great wisdom. He spent hours reading and writing about the scriptures, and he always said that there was something more. Something that ordinary eyes could not see. Lara, as a child, had never paid much attention to it, but now, as events took an increasingly strange turn, what he had said kept coming back to her. The diary was hidden in the old bookshelf, among other volumes of old stories and research. When Lara opened it, the smell of old paper filled the room. The pages were worn, but the words were legible, as if time had tried to erase them without success. She read the first few paragraphs, which spoke of a world on the verge of destruction, marked by unmistakable signs that something terrible was about to happen. Her grandfather's words were clear. The apocalypse was inevitable, but there was a way to delay it. Perhaps even avoid it for a while. That's when Lara found the reference to Revelation 9. The abyss will open, and creatures from the void will come. They will be like locusts, but with human faces, and their bite will be death. But in their terror will come the opportunity to stop the chaos by sealing the abyss again with a sacrifice. The description of the creatures made her break out in a cold sweat. She felt a chill run down her spine because, as absurd as the idea was, she was beginning to realize that the strange things that had occurred in the last few days were directly linked to what her grandfather had described. On the last page of the diary, a cryptic message was written in faded letters. When the seal is broken, the end will be only the beginning. The last seal must be found, and with it, the end of pain will come, or the beginning of true darkness. Lara stood still for a moment, pondering those words. What did her grandfather know? Where was that seal? And what did that sacrifice mean? She knew she had to find out, but how? Where could she look? Fear consumed her, but something inside her, a voice she didn't recognize, urged her on. She couldn't let whatever was approaching take control. As she held the journal, Lara heard a sound again, a murmur coming from the direction of the front door. Fear tightened her chest. She was not alone. The murmuring sound was louder this time, almost as if someone was trying to speak through the walls. Lara sat up with a start, her heart pounding. She glanced out the window, but the view was dim and hazy. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling that something terrible was about to happen washed over her. As if in a nightmare, she couldn't move, fear paralyzing her. She moved away from the window slowly, each step a struggle against the sense of impending danger. Her grandfather's journal was now firmly in her hands, as if it were her only anchor in the chaos. Lara felt like she was walking into the unknown, and the knowledge she sought only seemed to make the darkness denser. That morning, with its weak rays of sunlight, would soon become the stage for an even darker revelation. Lara didn't know it yet, but the city outside her home was in silent chaos. Disappearances began to be reported, but without explanation. Neighbors who had once greeted each other in the morning were now missing, and the few who still left their homes looked terrified, with glassy eyes and meaningless words falling from their lips. Lara knew the key lay in something her grandfather had mentioned in his notes. The seal. If the abyss had truly opened, something had to be done to stop the creatures described in the apocalypse from taking control. But where was this seal? How could she seal the abyss again? Throughout the day, Lara walked through the city, feeling a growing weight on her chest. Each street seemed emptier than the last, and the few she encountered were so absorbed in their own fears that they barely noticed her presence. She passed the old church, whose doors were closed, but the broken windows revealed the darkness that spread within. It was when a voice called out to her, low and familiar, that Lara turned quickly. It was Father Gabriel, a man she had known since childhood. He stood at the side of the church, his face pale and his eyes empty, as if something had consumed him. "Lara, you see what's happening, don't you?" He spoke in a hoarse voice, almost as if he was forcing the words. Out. Lara nodded, feeling a wave of despair in her stomach. What is this? What is happening to people? He looked at the church and then lowered his head as if he didn't have the strength to face what was coming. I can't explain everything. But what you're seeing is not just a nightmare. The apocalypse is real, Lara. The abyss has opened, and the creatures your grandfather described, they've already begun to walk among us. Lara felt a stab of panic, but tried to keep her cool. I found his diary. I know what he wrote. Where's the seal? How can I stop them? Father Gabriel looked at her gravely as if considering her words. The seal. It is lost, Lara. But make no mistake. Finding it will not be enough. Sacrifice is necessary, and not everyone will be willing to make it. Sacrifice? What do you mean? Lara asked, confusion mixed with a growing sense of urgency. You have to understand. The apocalypse is not something that just happens. It is already here, among us. What you do with it will decide whether the end will come in an explosion of pain or a sigh of peace. Lara felt the tension rise, the fear now becoming an almost palpable presence. Where is the seal? Where can I find it? The priest paused, his eyes narrowing. The seal. It's in a place no one else has dared to look. You need to go to the ancient temple. Your grandfather's map is correct, but be careful. It won't just be the seal you find there. He took a step back, as if stepping away from something invisible. I can't go with you, but know this. The abyss is closer than you think. They're coming to take us, Lara. All of us. Lara felt a shock wash over her body. She knew she had to act quickly. The temple was her only hope. But what she didn't know was that as she spoke to the priest, the shadows around her were growing thicker, and invisible creatures were beginning to move around the city, watching her, waiting. The decision was made. Lara knew she could wait no longer. Whatever was approaching the city, the creatures her grandfather had mentioned in his journal were growing bolder. The abyss would open, and she was the only one who seemed to have any chance of stopping it. The seal was in the ancient temple, as Father Gabriel had said, but what else would she find there? Tension coursed through her body with every step. She armed herself with what she could, a flashlight, a kitchen knife, not knowing what else might be useful. She had no idea what kind of enemies she would face. The only thing she knew was that she needed to get to the temple as quickly as possible before it was too late. As she walked through the city, Lara felt a growing heaviness in the air. Everything seemed silent, but there was something oppressive about it, as if the earth itself was sensing fear. There were no more sounds of people talking, no more activity in the streets, only the wind and the feeling that something was watching closely. Each corner seemed darker than the last, and the shadows in the alleys and sidewalks seemed to move of their own accord, as if they were alive. As she approached the temple grounds, Lara noticed something strange. A foul odor, like rotting flesh mixed with soggy earth, filled the air. She paused for a moment, trying to decide whether to turn back. But something inside her urged her forward, a feeling that the only way out for her was forward. She could no longer retreat. The ancient temple was in terrible condition, almost falling apart. The walls were covered in moss, and the entrance seemed surrounded by a dark energy that Lara could not explain. But she knew that this was where the end or the beginning of destruction would happen. As she stepped inside, the air seemed thicker. The sound of her own footsteps echoed off the broken walls, creating a strange amplification effect. She felt watched, as if something were waiting for her in the shadows. Her flashlight illuminated only what was closest, and the rest remained shrouded in impenetrable darkness. Lara walked down the narrow corridor, her heart pounding in her chest. Her grandfather's diary spoke of a secret room within the temple where the seal was hidden. But she didn't know what else was waiting there. A part of her felt like she was approaching an inevitable fate, but another, deeper part told her that perhaps this was the only way to save everyone. She reached the door to a larger room, and as she opened it, a wave of cold air hit her. The walls were covered in ancient symbols and drawings that resembled the ones her grandfather had drawn in his journal. But there was something else here. A central altar, covered in thick dust, as if it hadn't been touched in centuries. And on the altar sat a stone box, with even more elaborate symbols etched into its surface. Lara approached cautiously, sensing that she was about to discover something that would change everything. Before she could touch the box, she heard a low sound like the scraping of claws against the floor. Lara turned quickly, the flashlight trembling in her hands. The shadows in the room seemed to stir, as if taking shape, and then, from one of the darkest corners, a figure emerged. It was neither human nor animal. It was a misshapen creature, with the head of a man, but bloodshot eyes of a deep red and a mouth full of sharp teeth, like those of a predatory animal. Its legs were long and thin, ending in claws that scratched the stone floor. Lara took a step back, her body frozen in fear. The creature didn't move immediately, but the feeling that she was being watched intently grew stronger by the second. The air grew thicker and thicker with a pulsing energy, as if something ancient and evil were feeding on the atmosphere itself. "You are too late, mortal," the creature whispered, its voice like a distant echo, reverberating through the room. "The seal has already been broken. You cannot stop the abyss. It is already among us." Lara felt a wave of panic, but also a growing determination. She knew what she had to do. The seal was there, and she would not let this evil prevail. She took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the box. The creature, sensing her movement, lunged forward, its sharp claws slicing the air. Lara, in a desperate rush, raised her knife and threw it at the creature. She connected, but the creature did not stop. It was stronger, faster, more determined. Lara knew she could not defeat it with brute force. As the creature approached, Lara grabbed the box with both hands and opened it with a quick movement, feeling a cold, chilling energy emanating from within. Inside the box was a small golden seal, with symbols glowing faintly. As she touched it, a surge of power coursed through her body, and she felt as if something was connecting with her soul. The creature, upon seeing the seal, made a guttural sound, as if in agony. It retreated momentarily, but soon advanced again, more ferocious than before. Lara knew it. Was now or never. She grabbed the seal and, with a scream, threw it to the ground towards the altar. The moment the seal touched the altar, a burst of light illuminated the room, momentarily blinding Lara. The creature screamed, an agonized sound that seemed to pierce through her bones. When Lara opened her eyes, the creature was gone, but the air was still heavy, with the feeling that evil had not been completely defeated. Lara knelt down, exhausted. She knew this battle was far from over. The Abyss was sealed, but sacrifice was still necessary. What would she do next? Lara was still on the floor, cold sweat running down her face as she tried to catch her breath. The seal, now on the altar, seemed to glow with increasing intensity, as if it were absorbing the energy of the room itself. The creature was gone, but Lara could sense that something was still moving in the shadows. The abyss might have been temporarily sealed, but evil was not far away, and something much greater was about to happen. She stood up, a deep ache in her legs and arms, but fear and adrenaline kept her alert. The room was cold, and the air was heavy, charged with the energy of the unknown. Lara looked around, the walls of the old church now looking more menacing, as if they were watching her. It was then that she heard a low sound, like the whisper of several voices speaking at once. The shadows on the walls stirred, taking on distorted shapes. Lara took a step back, feeling that the seal had not resolved everything as she had hoped. Whatever was behind the chasm was still lurking. She looked at the altar, the seal now glowing with a blinding glow. Lara knew there was no more time to waste. Something was about to manifest, and she had to get out of here, or make the choice her grandfather had predicted. Sacrifice. She approached the altar, her mind racing. Her grandfather's journal had spoken of a sacrifice needed to seal the abyss for good, but it had never been clear what that meant. "You cannot stop the apocalypse without paying the price," he had written. The phrase gnawed at her mind. What was that price? Was she prepared to pay it? Before she could decide, a loud crash from the back of the room made her jump back. The temple door was closing of its own accord, and a strange pressure began to build, as if the temple itself were contracting around her. Lara realized with horror that the walls were shifting, closing in on the space around her. The shadow that had formed on the walls now materialized, taking on an even more grotesque form. It was a larger creature, with red eyes that seemed to burn with hellish fire. Its claws, elongated and sharp, scraped the stone floor, and its mouth, full of rotten teeth, opened in a monstrous smile. "You cannot escape, Lara," the creature said, its voice like 1,000 voices at once. "The abyss has already been opened. What you have done is merely delay the inevitable." Lara stood there for a moment, terror filling her, but at the same time, a sense of clarity began to dawn on her. She knew what she had to do, and she knew she wouldn't get another chance. The sacrifice, the final choice, was hers, and she couldn't put it off any longer. She looked at the seal on the altar and then, with a deep breath, turned her attention back to the creature. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking but determined. "Death," the creature replied with a wicked grin. "The blood sacrifice. The last seal must be broken. For the abyss to be completed, you have been chosen, Lara. Your life will be the price." The pressure in the room increased, and Lara felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were trying to rip out her soul. She looked around, searching for something, anything that might help her avoid this fate. But there was no more time. Then a picture flashed into her mind, the picture of her grandfather in his chair, reading from his notes, talking about the abyss and the price of salvation. He had made the choice before she had. He, too, had had to pay a price. Lara stared at the creature, her mind made up. She couldn't let the apocalypse happen. She couldn't let evil take over the world. With unexpected strength, She ran to the altar, grabbing the seal in both hands. The glow grew brighter, almost blinding. Lara knew that whatever happened, her life would be sacrificed to close the chasm. But she also knew that the struggle would not be in vain. Humanity still had a chance, and she was willing to pay the price. Before she could act, the creature lunged toward her, its claws shooting out to grab her. Lara, with a cry of determination, held the seal above her head and threw it at the altar, where the explosive light of the energy shone brighter than ever. The impact was deafening. A wave of power swept through the temple, causing the walls to tremble and the creature to scream in agony. Lara fell to her knees, feeling the energy burning through her body. But she could not. Stop. The chasm was closing and the price was being paid. The creature fell apart, its screams echoing through the room until they disappeared into the darkness. The light finally died down, and Lara stood there at the altar, her eyes heavy, pain taking over her body. She knew she had accomplished her mission. The abyss was closed, at least for now. But what she didn't know was that with her choice, something much greater had been unleashed. And the price she paid would not be the end. Lara woke in total darkness. Her head was pounding, and the weight of what had happened in the last few hours seemed to crush her. The altar was now empty, the temple room silent, but the echo of the abyss still echoed in her mind. She knew she had done what needed to be done, but a feeling of unease kept her from relaxing completely. Something wasn't right. Struggling to her feet, she felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if the sacrifice had left deep scars on her soul. But for some reason, her mind still couldn't process everything that had happened. She had closed the chasm, but the price was beyond her comprehension. The room was quiet, but Lara felt the silence was false. It was a stillness fraught with tension, as if something were building, waiting to happen. When she tried to move, something stopped her. Something invisible seemed to tug at her strength, as if the very space around her was shifting. The lantern she had left beside the altar was now unlit, but the room still exuded a strange energy. Lara looked at the seal, still glowing softly on the altar, now covered in a thin layer of dust. She approached it hesitantly, feeling that she shouldn't touch it again. But an inner force pulled her toward it, as if she were being called. Reluctantly, she reached out and touched the seal. Immediately, a wave of cold light coursed through her body, and terrifying visions invaded her mind. The abyss had not closed. The seal had not completed its task. Something was happening, something she could not understand. A voice echoed in her head, soft but full of power. "Do you think you can escape, Lara? The abyss never truly disappears. You closed one door, but another has opened." Lara stepped away from the altar, panic rising in her chest. The feeling that something bigger was behind all of this grew stronger. She had done what she had to, but it seemed that the sacrifice had not been enough. "No, that can't be true," she whispered to herself. "I saw the creature disappear. The seal, it worked. I did it." But the words did not calm her. Fear began to take over her thoughts. She turned to leave the temple, but when she looked at the door, she realized that something had changed. The walls were closer, the ceiling lower, as if the temple were contracting around her. Before she could react, the door slammed shut. Lara ran to it, trying to open it, but she couldn't. She was trapped. The sound of heavy breathing began to fill the room. Lara looked. to the center of the temple, where the shadow of a figure loomed larger and larger. A shape formed, towering in size, until a creature emerged from the shadows. It was larger than the first, with flaming eyes and an overwhelming presence. "Did you think you could stop the inevitable?" The creature's voice reverberated, echoing through the room like thunder. "The abyss cannot be closed, Lara. It will always find a way." Lara stepped back, feeling the pressure of the creature's presence. "What?" "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking, but her mind trying to organize itself. "The choice was yours." "But you failed," the creature replied with a smile that seemed to split its face. "Now, you will see the true price." Lara felt her breath catch in her throat, her fear beginning to turn into despair. She had done what she had to, but the abyss was back, stronger than ever. And now, it seemed she was the key to opening it completely. Time seemed to stand still as the creature advanced toward her, its claws crushing the stone floor. Lara looked around frantically, trying to find a solution, a way out, but there was none. What had she done? Was the sacrifice she had paid not enough to stop them? "You cannot escape what has already been unleashed," the creature continued. "What you brought with your sacrifice was merely an illusion of control. The abyss is alive, and it feeds on your pain, on your guilt." The words stabbed like knives into her heart. She looked at the seal, which now glowed more brightly, reflecting the red glow in the creature's eyes. It was as if the key to her destiny lay there, but somehow she had missed it. Something was missing. In a last, desperate attempt, Lara closed her eyes and prayed, no longer knowing who she was asking for help. But when she opened her eyes, something inexplicable happened. The seal on the altar shone with a blinding light. The walls began to shake violently, as if the temple itself was being consumed by an unknown force. And then, the creature let out a terrifying scream, its claws extending in a frenzied movement. Lara knew the fight wasn't over, but something was about to change. The abyss was closer than ever, and now she was the only obstacle that could stop its progress. But what would be the true price she would have to pay to finally seal it forever? The earth shook beneath Lara's feet as she watched the room crumble around her. The temple was crumbling, as if consumed by a force beyond human comprehension. The walls stretched and twisted, forming cracks that emanated a pulsing red light, as if the abyss itself were trying to break free of its prison. The creature, now fully materialized before her, no longer seemed threatening just for its monstrous appearance. It was its presence, a merciless, incomprehensible power that made Lara feel as if her body were being torn apart from within. Its red eyes, like burning embers, fixed on her, and the air around her grew heavy. Suffocating. She didn't know how, but the feeling that the end was near settled in her chest. The sacrifice she had made was not enough to stop the evil. Instead, she had released a wave of dark energy, a vortex that expanded, ready to swallow everything around it. The creature took another step forward, its claws slashing the air, and Lara felt a wave of panic, a sense that fate would not let her escape. She was at the center of something she did not understand, and every second that passed took her further away from salvation. "You cannot stop what has already been released," the creature whispered, its voice drawn out and filled with cruel pleasure. "The abyss is eternal, Lara. It always finds a way back." Lara tried to focus. She needed an answer, a solution to this nightmare. The seal was glowing with an almost unbearable light, but she knew she could no longer trust it. Something more had to be done. The weight of guilt and grief weighed down on her. She felt as if she had failed irreparably, as if she had been deceived by an illusion of control. The chasm had not been closed, and the creature before her was only a part of something larger, something she could not comprehend. You have failed, but there is a way to return things to the way they were, the creature said, its voice now soft, almost tempting. Make the ultimate sacrifice. Your blood, your final sacrifice can close the chasm once and for all. Only you can do it. The sound of his words made Lara's heart race. What did she mean by ultimate sacrifice? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're lying, she said, her voice firm but shaky. I won't sacrifice anything else. But the creature only smiled, a grotesque smile, and its words trailed off like venom. You don't understand. The abyss needs something more, something beyond a simple sacrifice. It needs you, Lara. You are the key to the end, and the end will be the price. Those words hit Lara like a bolt of lightning. Was she the key? Was the sacrifice she had made not the end, but the beginning of something even darker? Evil fed on her own pain and guilt, and she had only opened another door to the abyss. No, she mumbled, starting to back away, but her mind was clouded with the weight of the revelation. The room around her continued to twist, shadows swallowing everything around her. I can't be the key. But the creature stepped forward. Yes, you can. You always have been. Your blood, your soul, your pain. All of it was needed to keep the abyss closed. But your life is what holds it back. Without you, it will dominate. And what remains of your humanity will be consumed. Lara felt the pressure in her chest increase. She didn't know what to do. Everything she had believed, all the choices she had made, now seemed like pieces in a cruel game that was beyond her comprehension. She felt the energy in the room, the light from the seal, everything becoming an overwhelming force. The pain in her body and mind was almost unbearable. She backed away from the creature, her brain working frantically. Something didn't make sense. If the abyss was truly what the creature said it was, she still had a chance. There shouldn't be an end. She shouldn't be the one responsible for closing the abyss for good. With a burst of courage, Lara stepped forward to the altar, where the seal continued to glow with a nearly blinding light. She didn't know what she would do, but she knew she couldn't just give herself up. Something more was needed, something she didn't yet understand. Then she picked up the seal again, her fingers burning as she touched it. A deep blue glow enveloped the room, causing the creature to recoil, its expression twisting in anger. The pressure increased, and Lara felt her body being pulled into the center of the energy radiating from the seal. "This won't work!" the creature screamed, trying to advance, but something was holding it back. The blue light grew larger as if it were becoming a barrier between Lara and the creature. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Lara lifted the seal above her head and threw it toward the center of the room. The explosion of light was so intense that for a moment everything went black. When the light finally faded, the temple was in ruins. The walls were cracked, the altar destroyed. The creature was gone. But Lara knew the abyss was still there, waiting. The seal had broken, but not in a way she had imagined. She had made the ultimate sacrifice. What remained now was not peace, but a new journey. Lara knew that the end was not the end. The fight was far from over. The abyss would always return, and she was the only one who could prevent its complete liberation. Lara didn't know how long she had been standing there, alone among the ruins of the temple. The air was heavy, and the silence was overwhelming, as if the world had stopped for a moment. The walls, now cracked and shrouded in darkness, seemed to watch her. But there were no other creatures in sight. The seal was broken, the altar destroyed, and the sense of loss was deep in the air. But despite the destruction around her, Lara sensed that the real danger was far from over. The abyss, the evil that had been unleashed and fueled by her own choice, still loomed over her. It had not been sealed. It had merely transformed. She tried to stand, her legs still weak from the tension that had taken hold of her body. The pain persisted in her joints, as if each movement was a battle against the weight of her own suffering. When she looked at the ground, she saw a line of blood, her own blood, covering the altar. The ultimate sacrifice had been made, but the price was not limited to her life. The abyss had consumed her in a way she could not comprehend. Suddenly, a voice echoed in her mind, low and sullen, like the whisper of a cold wind. It was as if she could feel the very essence of the abyss, an invasive presence that invaded her. Every thought. "You cannot escape, Lara," the voice said, soft but filled with immense power. "Your choice was the key. What you did sealed your fate. The abyss is now within you. You are the bridge between this world and the next." Lara looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was no one. Only the shadows that now danced on the destroyed walls of the temple. The weight of the voice's words made her tremble. She wanted to deny it, wanted to run away from that dark truth, but something inside her prevented her from ignoring it. "No, that can't be true," Lara murmured, her lips dry, her eyes roaming over the temple ruins. The voice laughed, a low, almost hissing sound that seemed to make the surrounding stones tremble. "Do you think you have a choice?" The voice slithered like a venomous snake. "You are now the vessel of the abyss. The evil you tried to seal away can no longer be imprisoned. It is within you, Lara. You are both the key and the prison." Shock and fear began to take hold of her again. She felt a growing weight on her chest, as if the very existence of the abyss was becoming part of her soul. She touched her chest, trying to ease the sensation, but the pain she felt seemed to intensify with each passing second. The abyss had manifested itself within her. There was no escape. "You can't go back," the voice continued, deeper now, more intense. "You carry within you the key to liberation or destruction. The apocalypse you tried to prevent is your new destiny." Lara fell to her knees, feeling the gravity of the truth weigh down on her. The walls around her seemed to distort, spinning in circles. Reality was crumbling, and she knew she was losing control. What was left for her? If the abyss was inside her, what was left of her humanity? "You were never just a victim, Lara," the voice whispered, closer now, as if it were inside her mind, inside her heart. "You were always part of it. And now, you must choose. To break free and let the abyss take shape again, or to sacrifice everything, your life, your soul, to trap it once more." The tension in the air was rising. Lara could feel the struggle within her. Her mind screamed for a solution, a way to end this once and for all. But the abyss was not just an entity, it was something that existed beyond human comprehension, something deeper and older than anything she knew. "I can't," Lara whispered to herself, her voice cracked with emotional and physical pain. "I am not what you say. I am not the abyss." The room around her began to distort even more, as if space itself were bending and twisting. The light from the broken seal still glowed, a pale blue, almost ghostly light. Lara closed her eyes, trying to focus, trying to shut out the screams of the voice echoing in her head. But when she opened her eyes again, something had changed. The shadows that had previously been quiet began to move. The walls began to crumble, and what was left of the temple fell apart completely. Lara was now in absolute emptiness. She could no longer see the ruins of the temple. Everything was covered in deep darkness, and the feeling of loneliness was overwhelming. In the center of this void, the creature, or what was left of it, appeared. Its form was more fluid now, an amalgam of shadow and light, a presence that seemed to be both physical and mental. It approached Lara with terrifying speed, and the voice, now clearer, spoke one last time. "You chose, Lara. You are ours now. The abyss never goes away. It is with you." Lara didn't have time to react. Darkness enveloped her completely, and intense pain coursed through her body. The emptiness that surrounded her seemed to extend into her soul, and for the first time, Lara felt that the abyss was no longer just around her. It was within her being, in every cell, in every breath. But deep in her heart, something still rebelled. The battle was not lost. She knew she had to make a decision. The apocalypse was not inevitable, not while she had the strength to fight. The abyss might be a part of her, but that didn't mean it would define her. The void that enveloped Lara was oppressive. The walls of reality seemed to crumble around her, dissolving into endless darkness. She felt as if she were being pulled into an abyss, her mind consumed by the weight of those words. "You are ours now." The abyss had taken shape inside her, and the pain that accompanied it was both physical and mental, a sense that she was losing control. She breathed heavily, trying to hold on to the only thing that still seemed to have any value, her will to resist. But the force enveloping her was so overwhelming that her mind began to distort, as if the shadows were swallowing every piece of her identity. The presence of the creature, or what was left of it, was palpable, like a constant weight on her shoulders. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know where to start. The abyss was inside her, feeding on her pain, and with every passing second, she felt herself becoming another part of that void. But there was still a spark of resistance inside her, a flame that refused to go out. "I am not you," Lara said quietly, her throat tearing as she tried to stay lucid. "I am not the abyss." The creature stepped closer, its form twisting in the shadows, but the voice that emanated from it was soft, almost seductive. "You always have been. From the moment you were chosen, Lara, the abyss is your essence. It cannot be erased. What you have done, what you have unleashed, there is no going back." The pain grew, a relentless pressure that almost made her fall to her knees. She looked at her hands, now covered in cold sweat. The blood, the sacrifice, it all seemed to have been in vain. The abyss was not just in her mind, it was spreading through every fiber of her being, and she could no longer distinguish where she ended and where the evil began. But then something changed. A faint light began to shine on the horizon of her mind, like a distant star in a sea of darkness. Resistance. The memory of everything she had lost, of everything she still loved, flared up inside her. The flame of hope, though dim, was still alive. Lara focused on that fire, searching for a way to reignite it, to use it against what was consuming her. She remembered her choices, the sacrifice she had made, the fight against the forces of darkness. It could not all be in vain. She could not be consumed without fighting until her last breath. "No," she cried, finally finding a strength that seemed to come from deep within her soul. "I'm not yours. I've never been yours." The creature seemed to hesitate, as if challenged for the first time. The light around Lara began to grow brighter, illuminating the darkness, pushing back the shadows. The abyss had been trying to overwhelm her, but she felt different now. It was as if she had somehow discovered a weakness in it, a gap. Through which light could penetrate. The pain was still intense, but Lara used it as fuel. She knew she could not defeat the abyss with brute force. There was no physical battle to be fought. The fight was within her, a silent war of mind and soul. She had to choose. What would she do? The creature, now closer than ever, spoke in a menacing tone, as if sensing Lara's resistance. "You cannot defeat what has already been started. The apocalypse is within your reach, Lara. You cannot escape it." Lara looked at her with renewed determination. "It is not the apocalypse that is within my reach, but the chance to put an end to it all. I will close the abyss forever, even if it costs me everything." The creature smiled, a cruel smile, as if it knew she was on a path of no return. "Death is not the end, Lara. You don't know what you're saying. You can't simply close the abyss. It will consume you, and when it takes hold of your soul, you will be the key to its ultimate release." Lara felt the abyss's presence grow stronger within her, its sharp claws trying to trap her mind and spirit. But she refused to succumb. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the pain and pressure. She was no longer afraid. The abyss was within her, but she was not it. She would not allow it to define her end. With a last ounce of willpower, Lara focused. The light around her shone brightly, illuminating the shadows, dispelling the darkness. She felt something break inside her, as if breaking away from the fate the creature was trying to impose. The fight she was waging was not against the abyss, but against accepting its inevitability. "I am the resistance," Lara said, her voice stronger now, "and I choose to fight." In an explosion of light and sound, the chasm began to recede. The shadows disappeared, and the creature screamed in frustration, its form distorting and disintegrating under the force of Lara's resolve. The pain that had consumed her began to fade, and the darkness around her dissipated, leaving an uneasy calm in its place. Lara fell to her knees, exhausted but with a sense of victory. The abyss was no longer in control. She had made the final choice, the choice not to surrender to her dark fate. But despite her victory, she knew that this fight would never truly be won. The abyss might be temporarily contained, but its power was eternal. She would have to keep fighting, keep defending herself. The apocalypse had not been averted, but maybe, just maybe, she had managed to postpone the end for a little while longer. Silence enveloped Lara like a heavy blanket. The temple, now completely collapsed, lay in ruins, and the void around her seemed to swallow everything. The light that had appeared at the moment of her decision still flickered at the edge of her vision, a memory of the battle that had been fought within her. She had defeated the abyss, or at least contained it. But deep down, Lara knew that the real battle was far from over. The abyss was not something that could be sealed with a single choice, a single action. It was rooted in the human soul, a dark part of existence. Lara could not erase the evil that had once touched her heart, but she knew now that she had the power to resist it, to fight it at every turn. The abyss might be a reflection of the darkness that inhabited the world, but it did not have to be her prison. Not anymore. She struggled to her feet, her legs still shaking, exhaustion gnawing at her body. But her mind was clear. The light that had radiated from within her, that flame of resilience, still burned. She did not know what would come next, but she knew that her fate was now in her hands. She was no longer the key to destruction, but the guardian of what remained. The wind, which had once seemed to weigh down the crumbling temple, now calmed. Lara walked slowly through what was left of the room, her hands touching the broken stones, the still fresh blood of her sacrifice marking the history of this place. She stared at the pieces of the destroyed seal, the ancient runes now unrecognizable, as if time itself had worn away under the weight of her choices. But deep down, she knew that the apocalypse was not just an event of destruction. It was a journey, a crossing through the darkness into the light. Evil could not be eradicated, but it could be confronted. Perhaps sacrifice was not just a price, but a test. Lara had failed in many ways, but her greatest victory was her resistance. She had chosen to fight, to choose not to give in to the evil that sought to dominate her soul. As she walked through the ruins, Lara began to realize that something was different inside her. The abyss was still there, a constant presence, but she no longer feared it. She knew that true strength came not from physical struggle, but from willpower, from the decision to continue to face the darkness, no matter how tempting it was to surrender. She was no longer alone. The abyss might be eternal, but her own resilience was something no one could take from her. Suddenly, she stopped. Something was in the air, a whisper, a presence. It wasn't the abyss, but something else, something she hadn't noticed before. The shadows, the ones that had once consumed her, now seemed to dissipate around her, as if they were moving away, acknowledging her strength. The voice that had spoken in her mind, hissing and threatening, now seemed distant, weakened. Lara looked up at the sky where a faint light was beginning to appear on the horizon. It was not the light of the apocalypse, but a soft light that slid through the darkness. She felt the breeze on her face, cool and invigorating, as if the universe itself were offering her a new beginning. The fight was endless, but she knew that as long as she had the strength, she could endure. She turned toward the entrance to the ruined temple, the path that now stretched before her. She didn't know what she would find, but she knew she was not alone. On this journey, the abyss might try to consume all that was good within her, but Lara had found something greater, a flame that could not be extinguished. She took the first step out of the temple, feeling the weight of the journey that lay ahead. The apocalypse was not a one-time event, but a continual resistance against the forces that sought to dominate. She had proven to herself that the fight never ended, and that the abyss, no matter how eternal it seemed, would have no victory over her. not as long as she had the choice to fight. As she walked, Lara felt stronger, freer, even in the darkness. Evil would never disappear completely, but the strength of her resolve, her ability to resist, would accompany her every step. The apocalypse was not the end. It was only the beginning of an ongoing struggle, and she was ready to face it, more than ever.